You mentioned Golden Gate Park. That offers a good segue into your project there. One of the most interesting projects that's happened in California in recent years, in my opinion. This is a short course housed within one of the great parks in the world. And again, I say that with some bias. I used to live right next to Golden Gate Park. I love that park. This golf course has a place in my heart for sure. And to look at it now, it's just a lot different. So let's go to the beginning here, of your experience with Golden Gate Park Golf Course. You're from Wisconsin originally. You didn't grow up playing this course. When did you? But you live in California now. When did you first encounter Golden Gate Park Golf Course?
I moved out to California in 2001, and so I don't remember the specific date, but it probably would have been sometime between 2002 and 2004 that I first kind of wandered over there and stumbled upon it and saw it, and it's just a magical setting, right? So there's these wonderful kind of heaving dunes within the cypress trees. At that time, the golf course was very much kind of overgrown, not only in terms of the vegetation. Uh, you know, the trees had become so big and there were so many that they were almost kind of touching each other on these corridors. I mean, everything was very narrow, and the golf course had been maintained kind of all at rough height. So the whole place was 2 to 3 inches. It was wet and soggy, and so it in terms of what all the greens were small, simple little circles or whatever. So it felt very rudimentary, overgrown on multiple levels. But the landscape itself and the area is just really magical. Somebody described it almost like being part of a fairy tale, and it's a special place. And so that was the kind of the initial takeaway was, wow, this is Golden Gate Park as a whole is really magical. This little golf course within it is sets on a cool spot. It's too bad that the golf course that's there is presented as it was.
Yeah,
Uh,
really, really nice land, and also, the proximity of the ocean is a big deal here because I don't know. I've been there in the morning before, and often there's this kind of mist and this ocean influence. You can smell and hear the ocean, and it definitely adds to the ambiance of the place and this mystical character that you referred to earlier.
Yeah, it's 450 yards away from the ocean. Between the ocean and the golf course is a windmill, and so there's just neat stuff going on, right? So it's within the city, and about 10 years ago, the first tee of San Francisco took over operations of the golf course and became um, the entity that operates the golf course. It's still maintained by the city of San Francisco employees, but um, First Tee took over operations. They felt that it was a strategic move on their part in order to have a green grass facility for the kids in their program to be able to have access to and make use of. They're headquartered out of Harding Park, which is just a few miles away, and they have a great facility over there for the First Tee. There's also a 9-hole little par three course at Harding Park, known as the Fleming Nine. Um, and so when they took over operations, it became a really strategic part of kind of their portfolio and what they offer to the kids in their programming. Their lease was coming up and due to be renewed and renegotiated. And so that's how this project came about, was that they were working with the city on renewing or redoing their lease. And the First Tee came to them and said, we are willing to privately fundraise the money. We would like to renovate the golf course. It was in desperate need of a new irrigation system. We talked about kind of the overgrowth in terms of the drainage wasn't really working, even though underneath all that stuff were pure sand dunes, right? It was really kind of a quagmire out there, and so they came to the city and said, "Hey, if we'd like to stay, we want to have a long-term lease, and we're willing to invest." And so that's kind of how this whole thing came about.
Can you give me the basic outline of your plan? Like, what was the scope of the work, and what were the basic intentions and vision of this redesign project?
For sure. The golf course was has been there since 1951. It's been a treasured asset in the community from day one. And so it's not
Mhm.
like this was a failing golf course that needed to it was going to go away or die or whatnot. But there were definite opportunities there. We talked about the irrigation system, how the whole facility was kind of rough height and a quagmire and wet. And so we really wanted to address the drainage. Probably our biggest task and the most challenging aspect of the whole project was to remove about 6 to 12 inches of organic material that was residing on top of the native sand dunes. So again, the whole western part of Golden Gate Park and western part of San Francisco were all sand dunes 150 years ago, just big heaving sand dunes. And so at Golden Gate Park Golf Course, we believe that when they built it originally, they actually brought in soil and put that soil on top of those sand dunes. And so our biggest challenge was to remove all of that and to get that off to the sides. And it's a little bit of an interesting situation because the golf course resides within the park, but it's like its own little entity. There are property boundaries. So we had to lose all of that material within the golf course property. And so we joked around that we felt like the guys in Shawshank Redemption trying to lose material out of their jean pockets or whatever. We
Taking it
were
out into the yard
we were
and
we were looking for any possible little corner that we could tuck it into to lose it. We ended up losing it kind of as you play the golf course today. What's the backside of number 2, number 5, and number 7 T complex is where we lost it all. But so we scraped down. We got to those native sands. We wanted to really open up the property and remove any vegetation that was impacting turf quality, safety. There were a lot of different species that were maybe non-native. So we focused on trying to open up the property. Um, and then we wanted to have the golf course be more fun and more playable for everybody. One of the things that's really awesome about Golden Gate Park is this is a place truly for beginners. Most San Franciscans who start their journey in golf while they're residing in San Francisco start at Golden Gate Park. It's the home of many people's first round of golf, which I think is so special. And so when you think about that and who's going to play the golf course, we really wanted the golf course to be fun and playable for those players. And there were a couple of things about the old golf course that just weren't really conducive to that. There was only one set of tees. And many of those holes were well over 150 yards. And again, at all rough height, if you top a shot, it goes 10 feet. So what sounds benign to a avid golfer as a 150-yard hole, if you're out there playing your first round of golf and topping it, you're not getting there for 10 shots, right? So we thought that what would be great would be if the entire facility could be maintained at fairway height. So everything is going to be tightly mown, so the ball will bounce. We talked about those native sand dunes, conducive to great drainage, opening up the property, more sunlight, more airflow. So now we think we're going to have a golf course and we're utilizing fescue turf. And so we think we have all the ingredients for firm, fast golf. We're going to have multiple sets of tees so that if you're a beginner, maybe you play at 70 yards or 80 yards. And if you're an avid golfer, you're back at 120 to 150 throughout. So that we think is great. And then with the green complexes, they had all been basically very, very small, maybe 2,000-foot circles without a lot of interest. And yet the natural landforms out there were really wonderful, just wonderful, perfect terrain for golf. And so we just tried to create much more interesting green complexes that are bigger and can handle more traffic and give you more variety in terms of the hole locations that kind of fit that land. So those were the big tenets of what we did.
and the result is a kind of seamless looking golf course. If it's hard to portray this stuff on a podcast, but if people want to envision what Golden Gate Park looks like now, there's sort of this seamless sward of turf, throughout the golf course, the fairway height, and then you have the big undulating greens. It looks to me like you could play the golf course with a putter if you were so inclined. Um,
Very
is
much
that is
so.
that
That was one
accurate? Yeah.
that was one of the goals we talked about. And on holes 2 and hole 8, we would encourage people to use a putter. That might be your best route to the green. Yeah, definitely. There's no real forced carries. There's no big hazards. There are we one other element that we did really strive to incorporate was we wanted to highlight those native sands, and so we wanted to kind of do that in a way that would be conducive with who's going to play there. We didn't want it to be a great obstacle where people were losing golf balls or spending lots of time, but we did want it to have a visual impact. We felt like that would help kind of capture the sense of place. And so, in areas that were between golf holes, we incorporated those native sands. We created some big sandscapes that kind of look like blowout waste bunkers, if you will. And we think that those will really work well in terms of highlighting what's unique and special about the property without beating people up from a golf perspective.
And you managed to get some trees out.
We did. We were very fortunate. We had a lot of success on that front. Again, there were reasons for that. The turf health was compromised in a number of spots. There were a number of non-native species. There were situations where um, there were safety issues in terms of trees that were dead, dying, or dangerous or could fall over. We still have a couple. We have an issue on the second hole. To the right side of the second hole is a eucalyptus grove that's actually not on the golf course property, and it's really, really restricting sun. And it's a pretty big issue. And one of those trees has already kind of fallen over within there. So we're hopeful. We're going to have a ribbon cutting on Friday. The mayor's going to be there. I'm hoping we can maybe usher her out there and convince her that a few more eucalyptus could come down. So wish me luck on that.
What is it that Mike Young likes to say? Mike Young, the great Georgia architect, talks about like hammering something into the trees in the middle of the night.
We are not going to go. We're not going the rusty nail route. We're not going to
For
do
the
rusty.
record, that Jay would never do that.
We would not do that.
He's not that kind. Not that kind of guy.
That does not fit with the San Francisco vibes. One of the other things that we are really proud of is that we feel like this golf course will be as sustainable of a golf course as you're going to find anywhere in America, and that the footprint will be really, really light, which I think does tie right into California and San Francisco and Golden Gate Park. And so again, that was another thing that we think is a real benefit of this project.
Could you choose one hole on the redesigned course that you're particularly proud of? Just one.
Yeah, it's like asking your favorite kid.
I know. Our architects never like answering this question, but it's good for content.
Yeah,
so
we always try to hedge. I think probably the most dramatic transformation is the sixth hole. The sixth hole, for those who maybe played there a couple years ago, would have been the first hole. So all the golf holes stayed in the same location. We weren't allowed to kind of reroute anything, and we didn't really want to. We did renumber the golf course, and when we renumbered it, we actually took it back to its original routing from 1951. So what is the sixth hole today, 2 years ago, was the first hole. And it's one of the longer holes. It can be stretched to maybe 165 yards. It plays uphill. And 2 years ago, it was cypress trees on both sides of the hole, very narrow corridor with kind of a tabletop green with a bunker kind of front right. And then immediately to the left of the green was a huge hillside of shrubs, 15-foot tall shrubs that masked the view of anything. And so it was just a very, very claustrophobic hole. And so we were able to thin out the trees on both sides of the hole. There's still trees there kind of framing the hole, but that entire hillside, we were able to remove all the vegetation. And then that became one of these big kind of sandy blowouts. And we don't have the bunker in front. So if you want to bounce the ball up, you can bounce the ball up. And so in terms of a transformation, that one's a pretty dramatic transformation, pretty special. And I think people will take note of that. And to your point, the proximity to the ocean and stuff, you could never see the ocean before when you're on the golf course. Now, when you get to the seventh tee, after you walk off the sixth green, you can see the ocean. There's numerous spots where you can see the ocean, where you can see the city of San Francisco. You can see the famed Cliff House and the headlands beyond. So those are some aspects that are exciting about opening up the property.
Very cool. So what's the plan for the opening at this point? I know it's a little tricky with
So
different
the delay,
facilities going in.
yeah. So the golf course has been in a playable condition since October, November, and quite frankly, it's been really, really awesome to have kind of our own little playground here for a couple of months. We did. We,
You want to make this a private course, do you, Jay?
well,
Man,
I'll tell you what.
what an
If you
outrage!
know, lots of people ask, what would you have in your backyard if you could have a backyard
Right.
golf? Golden Gate Park would be a pretty awesome backyard facility to have, and we've played some cross country golf out there. It's been pretty neat.
Nice.
Um, but the delay in terms of the official opening of the golf course has been related to the clubhouse. We've been waiting for the clubhouse to be finished. The clubhouse is now finished. We are going to have a ribbon cutting on Friday, February 16th. In terms of how they will ultimately roll out the golf course, we have a pretty nasty weather forecast coming up for Saturday through Wednesday. Looks like it's supposed to be nasty rains and atmospheric river or whatever. So, uh, in within the next few weeks, the public will be out there playing golf. They are going to be somewhat strategic about it. As we're in a very wet spring. The golf course has handled it beautifully, but so they'll limit play a little bit. I think they want to keep it to maybe 80 rounds through the spring, and then in the summer they might open it up to even more. But so we're on the precipice. It's time for the public to get out there and enjoy.
Looking forward to it. Very cool project, and looking forward to seeing it myself. I haven't been out there yet, and I've got to fly down at some point.